Today we're going to talk about how to navigate through a difficult season. We all have difficult seasons from time to time, but for the first time in my life, and likely in most of yours, everyone is having a difficult season at the same time. And we're all in the same boat, and we're all kind of left with the question about how do we navigate this? We've never been in this situation before, and for a lot of us, our normal coping mechanisms we can't tap into. There's no retail therapy, there's no gym therapy, there's no hanging out with friends, so a lot of the things that we generally turn to are no longer available during this time. I have been thinking about this quite a bit just because I've been struggling personally, and so I kept thinking, like, where do I look? Who is the example of how to get through this? Where's the plan? Who has the plan? Nobody has a plan, and we're all trying to do this the hard way. I've really been praying and reading and trying to figure it out. And as I was reading the Gospels this past week, it occurred to me, why am I not focusing on how Jesus navigated all of the difficult things in his life when he was here on earth? And so I really started to focus on that. And once I did, I was like, that's where we should look. We should just see how he got through the difficult times. And so I took a few of the times in his life, not all of them, some of the more significant ones that are talked about. And I thought, well, let's just go through a few and kind of see how he handled that and see if we can glean anything from that and pull things out to help us. So the first thing that I looked at was the temptation of Jesus, which is found in Matthew 4:11. And if you recall, and I will just read Matthew 4:1 and 2, it says, "Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted there by the devil. For 40 days and 40 nights he fasted and became very hungry." If you just stop right there, and first of all, if I was in the wilderness, it would not turn out very well. But if I was in the wilderness and hungry, no good would come out of that. But not only did he resist temptation, but he did it amazingly. He responded to the devil by quoting scripture to him. And for example, this is one of my favorites. It says, "During this time, the devil came and said to him, 'If you are the Son of Man, tell these stones to become loaves of bread.' But Jesus told him, 'No, the scriptures say people do not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes out of the mouth of God.'" What did he do during this situation to get through it? Well, he depended on the scriptures, and he relied on God's promises and relied on what God had told him to get through that. And that is what we need to do. We need to be in the Word, we need to rely on God, and we need to fill our minds with all of his promises that we know to be true. One thing significantly he did not do was he did not get angry with God. Next, we're going to take a look at the days and weeks leading up to the crucifixion, because this undoubtedly was the most difficult time in Jesus' life here on earth. And I started with the Last Supper, which can be found in Matthew 26:20. And this is when he's having the Last Supper with his disciples before he is arrested and crucified. And he is having the Last Supper with Judas, who has already betrayed him. And he knows that Judas has already betrayed him. Yet he is still having supper with them. And then it goes on where Jesus predicts the disciples will desert him and that Peter is going to deny him. So these things he already knew, which had to be very difficult for Jesus. These were the people who were closest to him. And one of them had already betrayed him, and the others were going to desert him. And one of the disciples that were closest to him is going to deny him 3 times. So I can imagine the emotion that he's having, even though he knows it's going to happen. It has to be very difficult for him. Then I looked at Gethsemane, and that is in Matthew 26:38 through 44. So I'm just going to take you to 26:38. And I have read this many times, but reading it again for the purposes of just kind to try to figure out what Jesus was feeling and how he handled that opened my eyes. And in verse 36, it says, "Then Jesus went with the disciples to the olive grove called Gethsemane and said, 'Sit here while I go over there to pray.' And it said he became anguished and distressed. And he told them, 'My soul is crushed with grief to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me.'" So not only did he take them with him to keep watch, but he expresses very clearly the state he's in. And it says he is anguished and distressed, and that he says to them, "My soul is crushed with grief to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." But what did they do? What does it go on to tell us they did? They fell asleep. He goes to pray, he comes back, they're asleep. He wakes them up, he goes to pray, he comes back, they're asleep. He goes to pray, comes back, they were asleep. So the very people he took to keep watch with him and to pray with him fell asleep. So I can imagine how he felt at that moment when his soul is crushed with grief to the point of death, and all he wants is them to stay there and keep watch with him, and they can't even do that. Then we go on to his arrest. Matthew 26:56 said when they came to arrest Jesus that his disciples deserted him and fled. So his disciples who he had been with, who he had trained, deserted him. So now he's all alone, and which is a feeling he must have felt a lot during that week, isolated and alone, like no one had any idea what he was going through. Then let's look at when Jesus was before the council in Matthew 26:67 and 68, when it says, "Then they began to spit in Jesus' face and beat him with fists, and some slapped him, jeering, 'Prophesy to us, you Messiah. Who hit you that time?'" How horrible is that? How horrible he must have felt to not only be made fun of and mocked, but to be beaten. Then in Matthew 27:26, it said Pilate ordered Jesus flogged with a lead-tipped whip and turned him over to the Roman soldiers to be crucified. And then even going on to the crucifixion in Matthew 27:35, it says, "After they nailed him on the cross, soldiers gambled for his clothes by throwing dice." And then on to 39, the people passing by shouted abuse, shaking their heads in mockery. "Look at you now," they yelled. "You said you were going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days. Well then, if you're the Son of God, save yourself and come down from the cross." And not only did the people who were passing by mock him, but the leading priests, teachers of religious law, and the elders also mocked Jesus. "He saved others," they scoffed, "but he can't save himself. So he's the King of Israel, is he? Let him come down from that cross right now, and we will believe in him. He trusted God, so let God rescue him now, if he wants him. For he said, 'I am the Son of God.'" Even the revolutionaries who were crucified with him ridiculed him in the same way. Now, let's look at how Jesus handled that very difficult situation of the days and weeks leading up to the crucifixion. What a horrible time he had, and what awful things happened to him, and his disciples abandoned him. He's totally alone. And what does he do? Does he get angry? Does he withdraw? Does he panic? Does he feel defeated by his situation? Then I'm just giving you things that I've done. So I'm like, does he do any of the things that I've done the past 2 weeks? Does he isolate himself? No. As I've been reading this and thinking about Jesus' situation and how he navigated the weeks leading up to his crucifixion, I started thinking about how I was handling things and then how he handled things. And I've done literally everything wrong. So from his actions, I've made a list of things that we can do, that I can do to get through the difficult situations. So I just wanted to share them with you. And the first is pray, to spend time with God, and don't dwell on how bad our situation is, but dwell on God's promises and spend time reading them. So even back when Jesus was tempted, he's quoting scripture. He's relying on God's promises. And when Jesus is anguished and distressed, what does he do? He prays. He goes into the wilderness and he prays. And At no time did it ever say that Jesus is dwelling on his situation. It always says that he is looking to God's plan, looking to his promises, and hanging on to those, and he is praying to find his strength, and that is what we need to do. Another thing that is noticeably absent from Jesus' actions is anger. Don't be angry at God or at other people. Jesus showed tremendous grace towards his disciples and to Peter, who denied him, even though he knew it was going to happen. He showed tremendous forgiveness to the soldiers when he said, "Forgive them, for they know not what they're doing." So we too need to not be angry and just to show a lot of grace to people whose actions are less than the desirable, because the quarantine is just bringing out the worst in them. People handle it in different ways, and we just need to be patient. I remind myself of that every single day. And people should also have to be patient with me. I get that. The next thing is we don't need to isolate ourselves. We need to stay connected. So Jesus stayed connected to his disciples, and he kept teaching them, and he kept encouraging them. So that's what we need to do. And then finally, we need to use our time effectively. When Jesus realized that the impending crucifixion is getting closer and closer and closer, he spent time with his disciples teaching them. So he wanted to teach them all he could before he was gone and they didn't have him anymore. So he definitely used his time effectively. This one's a little bit harder for me because I'm not a planner, so I'm going to have to change that. But definitely we need to use our time effectively and spend time doing things that are positive and productive. I want to leave you with John 14, 1 through 4, and it starts, "Don't let your hearts be troubled. Don't let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God and trust also in me. There is more than enough room in my Father's home. If this were not so, would I have told you that I am going to prepare a place for you? When everything is ready, I will come and get you, so that you will always be with me where I am, and you know the way where I am going." How comforting is that? So in this time of great uncertainty, we know certain things are true. We know that fear and anxiety are not from God, and we know for sure that we need to not let our hearts be troubled, and we need to trust in God and trust in Jesus. So I leave you with that thought. God bless you, and I hope that you are able to navigate this difficult situation with God. And the answer is nobody has the plan, and we're all trying to do this the hard way. And
nobody has a plan, and we're trying to do this the hard way. There's some wild, staticky hairs here, baby. Okay, nobody has a plan, we're trying to do this the hard way. Just take it from the top. Nobody has a plan.
Nobody has. He has shown. So as I'm reading this, feeling very guilty because I've not handled it in any way like Jesus would have handled it, I started to think about his actions, and as I've been reading this and thinking